electronics, as they're called, attach to the skin in the same way you would attach a temporary tattoo.
Our thought was that if you could convert the electronics from the rigid, boxy form that it exists today into a format that looks like the skin in terms of mechanical properties, shape, stretchability, toughness, then you could almost make like a second skin that would laminate on the surface of the biological skin in a completely seamless, integrated fashion that would be essentially invisible to the user, but able to deliver all of this kind of new functionality through the skin. So the trick is, how do you go from a rigid silicon wafer-based type of electronics, which is the dominant form of electronics today, into an electronics that offers those same kind of performance or operating characteristics, but in the format of a tissue-like or skin-like form.
Researchers developed S-shaped circuits that can move with the skin, expanding, contracting, and twisting without affecting performance. Through this technology, the team has been able to demonstrate a variety of devices on the electronic platform, including EMG sensors, LEDs, and solar cells. Other demonstrations have shown the wearers controlling video games.
The kind of functioning systems that we demonstrated in this paper involve devices that can monitor brain function, so they laminate onto the forehead and they can monitor brain waves and determine we can recover high-quality signals in this kind of skin-like epidermal system that are comparable to state-of-the-art conventional electrodes that involve bulky pads strapped to the skin. So the fidelity of the measurement is equal to the best existing technology that's out there today, but in this very unique skin-like form.
ID Act, a post-9/11 plan to improve security rules for driver's licenses. Finally, details were unveiled Friday, and it's going to mean big changes in the way we get and renew our most common form of ID.
One by one, second graders at the Bonita Country Day School flashed their best smiles, not for school pictures, but for an ID card that hopefully will never get used.
Deadline for Real ID, a requirement that Americans get a more secure driver's license if they want to use it to board planes.
Here's the question. You already provide a photo ID or passport when you travel. So why is the Transportation Security Administration demanding to obtain more private information about you before you can board any commercial airliner in the U.S.? Here are the facts. The TSA, acting in accordance with a congressional mandate, is imposing its so-called Secure Flight Program beginning this weekend. The program will require most people on domestic flights to provide their dates of birth and their gender as a part of this new screening process.
The microchip, the size of a grain of rice, is injected under the skin and gives off a low-frequency radio wave. A scanner reads each chip's identification number. The next step, say researchers, is developing an implantable chip with a global positioning system to track people miles away.
The state has not at least begun the process of implementing this by May 2008. Then the driver's license from that state will no longer be accepted for federal identification purposes. And that's going to be inconvenient for people from that state. Now, many of them may use other IDs. They may use their passport or a federal pass card or some other document. But for those who want to use their driver's license to get on airplanes, they're going to have an incentive to make sure their state at least begins the process of working with us to meet this congressional mandate.
It's a pretty heavy hammer.
The government will make it seem as though the airlines and eventually the railroads and soon the toll takers on highways and city bus drivers and gas station attendants as well all want this information. Don't believe it. It is the government that wants this information. You see, the government, the federal government, is on a path to require a national ID card so it can invade our privacy and track our very movements. This is utterly repugnant to that most American of rights. We must stop this before it...
For the last several years, Homeland Security has been working desperately on the prime focus of creating an immense variety of identification devices to gather every individual's personal information. In the year 2006, the U.S. House of Representatives approved legislation with U.S. visit to pass the H.R. 1148 database bill to enforce citizens to comply with the inception of divulging their entire individual identity to Homeland Security. A perfect example to support this fact is the vast majority of kids in schools who have to finger scan themselves just to grab a bite at the cafeteria to adults who are just trying to have a good time at some nightclub. This new method of identification technology was intended to create the illusion of safety and security for you and your children. And although a very low percentage of this may be true, what you need to grasp is that the real purpose for this new approach on the so-called identity protection is to get society comfortable enough to accept this violation of personal information, kind of like in the same way you would care less if you saw someone smoking a cigarette. Now there are 3 steps on how all this is going to plan out. And the first step is biometrics. This technology is now being used in real time. Basically, how biometrics works is that it records all of your physical characteristics, such as the anatomy of your facial structure, fingerprints, the iris of your eyes, to the behavioral characteristics of your voice, the amount of times your eyes blink, to the dialect of how you speak. Once all of these physical traits are stored inside the biometric system, all of your physical information is then slingshot right back to the Department of Homeland Security. From this point, every individual who has accepted this method of identification is now locked inside a monitor control grid in which records your every transaction, thus inhibiting the right of privacy and personal discretion. This is all being done by the ones in the shadows of key positions and places of authority. So now that you have the basic concept of how this new age of technology is being used against the people, let us further comprehend why this process is being ushered to society in the first place.
The government taking a big new step, looking to build a huge database of people's physical characteristics. It's called biometrics.
And I hope that you're not on that terror watch list.
Yeah, we don't know.
Because it did not receive much of any Senate vote, nor was it assigned from a previous or current president. Now for some, this bill may appear to be very convenient, but what most fail to realize about this situation is the true nature of what this bill is really all about. To put it simply, the National ID card is biometrics on steroids. Let me put it like this. Your driver's license, birth certificate, social security card, fingerprints, iris retina scan, health records, criminal background, credit history, and a small database chip along with every piece of personal information you could possibly imagine is all stored in this one National ID card. Should this PASS ID Act get presidential approval, the very foundation of our individual privacy will become subject of everlasting scrutiny. Throughout the progression of these tyrannic bills being fought to pass legislation with tooth and nail, the top global elites have been working alongside with one of the biggest, unpatriotic, corrupt scientific corporations to implant a rice grain-sized microchip tracking device pierced inside the flesh of every man, woman, and child in order to bring forth what this Luciferic empire has been striving to achieve for the last half-century, and that is a microchip-controlled population. This microchip will contain your entire existence, from where you live, how much you have left in your bank account, to where you are located on Earth exactly at any given time or place. Every orbiting satellite will transmit your approximate location anywhere on the planet, monitoring all transactions you make under constant surveillance 24 hours a day.
I cannot stress enough of how crucial it is for you to understand that if you were to take this microchip implant, as much as you might think that it is beneficial to your own safety, the truth is, you won't. For the very moment you inject this implant into your body, every aspect of your entire life will be magnified, watched, and controlled under the lens of their microscope. The apathy of the majority of the American people is in a constant battle to know the real truth, but cannot grasp the bigger picture. When I say this, you should keep in mind that when you combine all three of these steps together, you will then finally come to see the true intention and purpose for what this microchip is really for. This design is to adapt into society and to strip man from all physical currency, give rise to those who control in the shadows, and when the time is right, create a cashless society. The beginning stages of this RFID implantation will be first introduced as a voluntary system to where you can choose to take it or not take it at all. But it's just a matter of time before this freedom of choice is no longer an option and will become mandatory by law. The parallels in this case bring us to the two most obvious yet disturbing signs in this situation that prove why this problem was foretold thousands of years ago and how it relates to the modern day consequences we would face should we refuse to comply with our malignant government. How so? For whosoever were to take this microchip and shortly after decide to not conform with the government, after realizing the true nature of this tracker module, will just end up having the Verichip turned off. From this point, every person who embodies this disabled microchip will by law become strictly prohibited to sell or purchase any source of food, clothes, shelter, medical treatment, and I mean anything, simply because your entire identity will no longer remain active in a database system. Now, where do we find the parallels in comparison to this agenda? In the very last book of the New Testament. And he calls it all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in the right hand or in the foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell unless he had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. This calls for wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Understand that these adamant factors will be put into place while the media instills fear into society, because at the end of it all, the painted future will be for everyone to accept the mark of the beast. Since you still have the narrowest window of opportunity to actually learn this vital information in accordance with the limited amount of truthful, credible sources exposing this knowledge, time is of essence for you to finally understand why you must not believe the countless falsified reasons to accept implanting this microchip into your body. This tyrannic plot is by far probably the most self-deluded enslaving philosophy that the ruling class elite have adopted. But be that as it may, as surreal this information may appeal, the Illuminati have planned this long before technology ever actually came into existence. And I only use this analogy to simplify how luciferic this agenda has been for the last several centuries. So in turn, after observing all of these documented facts in the greatest scope of detail from all possible vantage points, know this. Whether you are a Democrat, Republican, rich, poor, overweight, skinny, tall, short, or any of those things, understand that love, unity, and freedom has long since always been the primary enemy to obliterate completely. For this has been designed and camouflaged to perpetuate the smokescreen of individual liberty, inevitably inducing the deception of freedom.